My word.
Yeah, better now than later. Okay.
Well, I know what the intro for this show is going to be.
That wasn't on purpose.
Just someone trashing a room beforehand.
No, it's post daughter's slumber party, so they're
trying to create your own jazz joint.
No.
Just rack it.
It was a lot of cleaning had to be done after the big slumber party. So we're all clear now. We're ready to go. Yeah, that's a very predictable intro.
That's that one taken care of anyway. Okay, everyone, welcome back to Tokyo Jazz Joints. Good to have you again for another week. This week is episode 21. We never imagined we'd be getting into the 20s with this, but it's fantastic to see everyone still listening. We're getting lovely comments each week and some nice feedback from you. So keep listening, keep sharing. Keep telling your friends and keep an eye on our social media feed. You can always get us at Tokyo Jazz Joints and, of course, the website, tokyojazzjoints.com. Make sure you've got that open for every episode if you can do, because obviously as we talk about the places, it should really enrich it if you can look at the photographs as well. James, how are things?
Well, really good, man. And 21 is a great number. I still remember taking my first drink of alcohol when I turned 21 back many, many years ago. Of course, that's the drinking age in the United States. So, I had to wait until I was of legal age to enjoy my first beer, and I can still remember the taste of it.
Funny that, because my first drink, I would say, was around 24, even though technically I could have drunk from when I was 18. And I think it was Japan. I don't know whether Japan took its toll in that way, but I never started drinking until I went to Japan, so it maybe has a lot to answer for. Anyway, that's
remarkable, considering you were in Glasgow for quite a few years. That's a pretty remarkable feat of discipline. Very impressed.
And grew up in Ireland. I mean, if we're leaning into those stereotypes,
wasn't going to say that, but yeah.
So this week we are back in Tokyo. This is the second of our, certainly at the moment anyway, 3-part series of Tokyo deep cuts. These are kind of these places, I suppose, that fall through the cracks in the sense that they're maybe not a natural fit with one of our thematic episodes. They are places that we did visit, of course, and photographed. And like all the jazz joints, they have their own kind of inimitable charms or there's something kind of weird and quirky about them. And certainly in the contact that we've had with other listeners and fans of the project, they're not places often that are mentioned unless maybe, you happen to live in that neighborhood or, you'd come across it through some sort of recommendation from a Japanese friend or something like that. So we're going to cover 4 joints today. And I'd say we're going to go in, I never can get this one right. Is it ascending or descending? I think it's ascending order. And that's not to do any disrespect to any of the joints in themselves, but we're going to finish with an absolute belter. And I'd say when we get into the top 5 jazz joints of all time, as far as we're concerned, episode, this one, without a doubt, I say, is going to be pushing for the number 1 spot with me. So anyway, we'll come to that in a moment. Let's kick off with Ragtime. What can you tell us about Ragtime?
Ragtime, a very important place for me. When I was a graduate student in Japan about 16, 17 years ago, I lived out in a student dorm way in the western sort of residential suburbs. And one day I happened to take a different train, blah, 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 came out of the train station, boom, there it is, a little sign with jazz on it. So, of course, I went in and walked up the mandatory rickety stairs. By now, we've mentioned probably 20 places that you climb up a set of rickety stairs.
Yes, please. Please.
Very tiny room. And Ragtime is just beautiful. It's a square little space, very wooden. Tons of albums, of course, but it's located in a neighborhood. I mean, this is a good half an hour's ride west of central Tokyo. So when I first wrote about Ragtime on my website, Tokyo Jazz Site, I put, only in Japan would you be able to find such an authentic, incredible jazz spot way out in the distant suburbs. And I mean, that's still very true. This is the real deal. What was really interesting, and you can see it from the first sign, if you're looking at TokyoJazzJoints.com under Ragtime, you got a great picture of it. You can see the sort of very local street that it's on. Modern jazz, open 3 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then in the background, you've got like a supermarket on the right. You've got a gyoza shop, a dumpling shop on the left. People are doing their shopping. There's a cab coming through the narrow streets. It's just that kind of neighborhood place that people stop by for coffee. The 2 a.m. thing is a little unusual. Most places don't stay open that late. I don't think we've been to, even the clubs close earlier than that, right? So for a place that's not specifically a nighttime bar, that's a lot of opening hours, you know?
Yeah, I mean, having said that, I suppose we mentioned this previously. I mean, again, if you've not been to Japan, you'll probably be amazed by the utter lack of any kind of licensing laws. So a lot of the times these opening hours are decided by the owner purely for personal reasons. I mean, there's very little restriction in terms of when bars, restaurants close. And I mean, I know there's a lot of cities that get that title of never sleeping, but I think Tokyo is generally one of those places where any time of the night or day you can go in somewhere, get some food, have a drink, and you're not restricted or hampered in that same way by, you know, we got to get out by this time or we got to drink up because the pubs are closing or whatever. So it's nice in that sense, you know, but I think, like, for me, Ragtime, it's interesting you talk about it having that kind of effect or that memory on you, because I think for me, it's one of those places that I remember going to it, and it's a beautiful place inside, but it doesn't stand out in my mind, and I tend to sort of lump it in with places that kind of have similar names, like, you know, Sometime and Scratch, and there's kind of like a group of those places in Tokyo that maybe didn't have such a huge impact on me in the same way. But looking at the photographs again, I mean, it is beautiful inside, all sort of decked out in wood, and it has a really old school kind of vibe, particularly when you look at that collection of records with the books and magazines and then the speakers in the foreground.
Oh, yeah, completely. And, you know, I think definitely, as you said, I mean, I spent a good part of my supposed research time when I was in grad school at Ragtime, supposedly studying, but really just drinking all day and listening to records and talking to the locals in there. So it's definitely an important place for me. And the photographs that he has around, and you captured a couple of them in the stairwell. You've got the Miles Davis record, you got Jim Hall. You know, it's certainly a lived-in place. And I did not remember, I've got to interject here, this photo you have here of the bottle keeps.
I'm just looking at it myself, yeah.
With the Who Are You? I did not remember you taking that. Yeah. I mean, that's just great, and complete mystery as to why it's in English.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I suppose maybe the implication is that someone non-Japanese came along one night, bought this bottle. Whatever happened that evening, maybe it got messy, but they didn't obviously get their name on it or whatever the reason. And we've talked a lot about this bottle keep system. It's very Japanese, you know, where you can see, if you're looking at the photos on the left-hand bottle of I.W. Harper, there's a name written on the left and right-hand side of the sticker at the top. And equally on the right, there's a name on it there and a date as well, in which it was purchased. And I mean, it's a cheaper way to drink, isn't it? But
that's exactly what must have happened, yeah, because it probably was some foreign person who, you know, had a little bit too much bourbon and just didn't know the system. You know, and didn't realize that, no, you have to write your own name on the bottle and the date that you bought it. Yeah. And so the owner probably would have remembered that and written that there. But that's just, there's something about that that's just really sweet, you know?
I mean, the other
rather
alternative,
than just drinking it up.
The other alternative, of course, is, you know, it's just a very deep existential question posed there, so that people who take photographs of it, even 5-6 years later, will still be discussing what the meaning of it is, in which case it's been fairly successful.
I was thinking, if you're tucked into that bottle of Kentucky Straight, you may want to avoid such existential questions as that and just listen to the jazz. But getting to your next picture there, another in the series of beautiful menus up on the wall. There's something just so sweet and gorgeous about that the time it would take to write those out, you know, and you can see little additions here and there that they've added, you know, in terms of the price, or like, you know, to add things extra. And it's just, I've always been curious about the one at the bottom. For our non-Japanese readers, it's the little white one at the bottom. that says aquapatsu. What is that exactly? Do you have any idea? One for 400 yen.
Aquapatsu.
Yeah, what do you think? Aqua parts. I mean, what?
If
could
anybody,
that be?
anyone listening recognizes what that might be, I mean, if you know any Japanese at all, you'll know often with katakana, which is the alphabet used for a lot of loan words from different languages, you often have to kind of roll it over your tongue 5 or 6 times before you gradually recognize what the actual original word was in English.
Exactly. Like it's the phonetic alphabet you use for overseas words. And so you have, like, in the food one at the top, you see 300, it says chocolate, chocoretto, but aquapazza, is that a drink? Is it some sort of food? For some reason, that kind of stuck in my head. Again, I never order the food in these places, but I love the menus in this place. I love the lighting, and it's a really cool system. Now you can see the little gnome on the table with some pencils, right?
Yeah.
Underneath the picture. So when you get your coffee or your drink, he gives you a little piece of paper. So you grab a pencil and write down a request of what you want to hear. Now, supposedly you're only supposed to ask for one tune. But believe me, I've been in there and I've asked for like 10 tunes in a row. And, they played it, probably just assuming, oh yeah, the foreigner. Of course, he doesn't follow the rules, but that was a really, really cool one too. I'm always happy about places. We've talked previously about Chigusa in Yokohama, the Great Chigusa, where you get the menu of 50 pages of jazz albums and you can make your request. Some of the soul music bars do that too, but it always adds a nice little warm flavor to it. You feel like, oh, okay, I'm not just intruding on the owner and his, obscure and valuable collection. I'm here to like have a communal experience. Yeah. And it was just great spending time there to do that.
Yeah, it's a really nice system, isn't it? And I think it's kind of reminiscent of the on-demand listening sort of era that we live in, where everything streams and you hear a song or someone mentions a song, you immediately go to your phone, your device, whatever, and you can access it. So, nice.
Well,
nice
even before that, because remember, I think we've talked way back in the beginning of this podcast series, talking about what the jazz kisaten really are. Ragtime does date back a bit, and at the time when Ragtime and other places like that opened, people could not afford the records, literally didn't have any access to it. There were, either you went to the shop and you got to listen to one track, or you'd go to a jazz cafe if you didn't catch it on the radio. So being able to request the new Coltrane or whatever, that was like a really valuable experience to have. And I really like how they've continued to do it because, not like, as you said, you can just go home and queue up whatever you want, but to request it, to write it down, that sort of ritualistic aspect of it, I really enjoy. And that's very Japanese.
Yeah. I mean, before we move on, just again, for the fans of Easter eggs, again, you'll see on the entrance hall there is, of course, predictably a couple of photographs of Miles, actually just one, sorry, in the photo, but you'll see down at the bottom, there is the soundtrack poster for this French film, which I'm not going to butcher on the podcast, but the translation in English is Elevator to the Gallows, and apologies.
Yeah, Elevator to the Gallows, although for some reason the soundtrack version I have of that is called Lift to the Scaffolds. I'm assuming Lift being I must have the British version of that then.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously that is the photograph, that's the album which features in the photograph from Garo. So if you were listening to our All the Single Ladies episode where we discussed Garo in some detail, you'll probably remember from that photograph that album is on display in the sort of interior shot of Garo. So yeah, it's always nice to see these little connections between the place as well. And if you look really carefully, you can spot a Village Vanguard t-shirt up there on the roof as well, just above the photograph with the gnome. So nice to see those little touches as well in these places.
So moving to our next joint, and I'll spare you, Philip, your butchering of the English language in the American context.
Please, yeah.
It is the Adirondack Cafe. A very curious name, which unfortunately we didn't get a chance. We did talk to the owner there, but being a good New York City boy, of course, I'm familiar with the Adirondack region, which is in upstate New York, beautiful mountainous area in the north part of the state. So I'm not sure why he's named it that, but if you're looking at the pictures, you can see on the door, it's kind of this picture of a lake with like a canoe in it. It's the kind of thing you would see in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. Not sure the connection to jazz, but anyway, what did you find really unique about this place? Because it doesn't really share the vibe of anywhere else we've been to.
Yeah, I mean, this place is really interesting, I think, because you can see from the photographs, and I've done my best to certainly photograph some of it, but, even things like there's a sort of a curious, what looks like a coaster of this wonderful World Jazz Foundation with Louis Armstrong and the American-Japanese flags. And obviously then you can see signed photograph of Teddy Wilson. And equally on other walls, just covered with these very meticulously framed photographs and memorabilia. You can see the Day in Harlem photograph there in small. There's obviously the Duke Ellington poster. And I think for me, this place looked really had a feel of like almost an archive about it. It's funny because actually one of the photographs has a photograph of an old record shop, which I'm guessing is from the States. And there's something about this place that just has a very, almost like it was put together by a jazz historian or a librarian. It is a cafe. As we see from the door, it does serve fine food and beverages. But, there's something beautiful about it, the way that it preserved all this jazz memorabilia. And everywhere you looked, everywhere you turned, there were either, little artifacts, records, CDs, signed things, framed pictures. And from that point of view, it really sticks in my head as being somewhere sort of, I suppose, quite unique, at the risk of maybe overusing that word when we're referring to jazz joints. I know as well, from the going in together with you, like it had a very local vibe, didn't it? It felt very much like a telltale sign is often those people at the counter. You often find that people sitting at the counter are sitting there because they have the confidence to do so because they're regulars and they're used to being there.
Yeah, you could hear the conversation going on, that they were very familiar to the owners and obviously regular customers. And just to go back for 1 second, you're talking about sort of like the archival feel for it, or the picture you got of the Teddy Wilson one from 1970, right next to it, that Louis Armstrong coaster, which says, the wonderful World Jazz Foundation. So underneath it, in Japanese, it says the Louis Armstrong, the Japanese Louis Armstrong Association Kyokai. We've talked about how there's always associations for everything in Japan. And I'm really interested to know if that association still exists, if some of the older members who've collected this memorabilia, because if my eyes are not deceiving me, and it's hard to focus right now because I'm having a little bit of a as they call it here, a Rogan moment or reading glasses moment.
Oh dear!
I believe that photo is by Yuko Saito. Is it say under the picture of Louis with the two flags? So that would mean that was taken in Japan. I don't recall Louis Armstrong coming ever to Japan to play gigs. Maybe on one of when he was working those State Department tours, it's possible. But that means we're going way, way back to the 50s. So even at that time period, there was not only jazz fans, there was actually associations and groups formalized, getting together to welcome Louis Armstrong for his Japan tour. And they made a coaster, and somehow it ended up here in the Adirondack Cafe. I mean, that to me is just amazing.
I mean, I noticed the one above says Remember Satchmo, so it may have been started after he passed away or something, as a sort of a memorial type organization as well. I was wondering too, just looking at some of the other memorabilia, if you look at the final picture in the set, which has got probably your beer on there, open and ready to go. But like you'll see on the right, there is the Adirondack Cafe, and then Now Playing. And to me, that almost looks like it might have come from somewhere else. So I don't know if the inspiration for the name has maybe been a cafe that someone had previously, or the owner had previously visited in the States, maybe still going, maybe no longer there. But it almost looks like something, to me, it doesn't look like something that was made for that place. It looks very much like something that had been bought in like an antique shop. It's possible,
except the rather unfortunate caricature underneath it is not something you would see, certainly not in the present day, but even in the last several decades in the States. So I'm not sure. It's possible that the place was not originally a jazz cafe, maybe in a different location. Unfortunately, when we visited, it was a little bit busy, so we didn't get a chance to do the usual sort of 15 to 20 minute conversation with the owner that we usually do. But certainly, just again, in every photo you have of it, look at the amount of flyers, postcards, signed portraits, definitely tending towards the more vocal and swing period of jazz.
Absolutely,
and that might explain as well the age of the customers that then tend to go there. But it has a combination of both that sort of, that museum feel, but still a very working cafe. Like, people were hanging out there.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they you could tell that those guys and the lady were there when we got in, and they were going to be there for another couple hours afterwards. And I'm mentioning the location as well, because this is in the Jimbocho neighborhood, which is basically the book-selling and publishing neighborhood of Tokyo from centuries back. Not too many jazz spots in that area. So I am wondering if maybe this was the sort of second location, because certainly all the memorabilia comes from years back. It had to have been somewhere else first.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well appointed, isn't it? It seems in pretty good nick for, having been a very old place, for sure. Probably one of the busier places we went in terms of photographing it. I mean, it's amazing. And you'll see there's a couple of other old guys at the bar as well in the photograph of the top of the piano, where you can see the reflection of the bar in the mirror. So yeah, it was a jumping place, really, wasn't it?
I'm gonna have to stop back there, because I just noticed as well, like, the burgers must be good, because he's got the ketchup and mustard already set out on the table. That's a very American thing.
You're gonna break your Tokyo Jazz Joint's fasting rule.
I may have to do that. I'll try a burger,
Exciting.
Get a Heartland beer, and listen to some swing. Yeah,
More breaking news. Anyway, as we all know, I don't share your seeming hatred of swing and vocal jazz. So we'll not get into that right now. But let's move on, because we want to give some time to the last two places as well. The third place that we're going to talk about today is the rather curiously named Owl. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It
sounded pretty good.
It's inspired by the bird, the owl. It's not clear why, but as you would expect.
Oh, I think it's very clear why. That's what we're going to get into. I think it's very clear why. Once we talk about the owner. Well, what are owls very famous for?
Well, they're quite wise, aren't they?
Yeah, I would say they're solitary. They stay up all night, and they hang out by themselves up on a tree. No, there's a much more practical reason for it. I'd like to think it was that. Owl is located in the neighborhood called Ikebukuro, which is how would you describe Ikebukuro? Is it the Brooklyn of?
I wouldn't have thought. Well, certainly not Brooklyn as it is now. I would say it's like the budget version of Shibuya.
Very budget, yeah. Okay. It's a massive, I think it's the second largest station in Japan after Shinjuku Station. A very oppressive train station with a very low ceiling, of which 4 or 5 million people pass through every day. I used to commute there when I first came to Japan. So when you come out of the Ikebukuro station, you think, as a visitor to Japan, you think, oh, wow, this is downtown Tokyo. This is the biggest part of town, but it's not. It's located a little bit northeast. And it's, to be honest, it doesn't have the best reputation. It's known for having a lot of cheap shops. There's another Chinatown that's grown on the north part of the station. And there's a real monstrosity of a building called the Sunshine. What is it called? Sunshine Building or Sunshine
City, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the most non-sunshiny type box concrete 80-story building. It's absolutely hideous. The kind of thing that they built after the war, thinking that it was cool.
You're really selling it. You're really selling it. You should work for the Ikebukuro Tourism Board, if there's such a thing.
I earned it. I had to commute through there for a year and a half, so I'm allowed to go off a little bit. Basically, not the hippest part of town, but it's got a couple great jazz joints. Owl was tricky. I had been trying to go there for a couple years before we even started the project. And I think I remember telling you, Philip, that I could never, it took 3 years for me to get in, and partially my fault. His opening hours were very strange, and for reasons still unclear, he does not open the place on Saturdays. Now, as I just described, Ikebukuro is packed with people shopping, eating, and drinking all weekend long. So to not open on a Saturday, which is a very typical jazz cafe time to be open, or you'd get most of your customers, is completely inexplicable. I missed that information because it was on a tiny little sign on the front door covered with a lot of other posters and whatnot. But I finally did get in at one point. And the owner basically, unquestionably, the most uncommunicative guy we've met on our project.
It may be more than personality for sure, but I would say almost certainly that he didn't make eye contact with us the entire time that we were there. And that was including when we sort of had a very brief kind of chat with him. I think we were kind of conscious as well. I remember being, we're keeping our voices a little quieter, and we were just conscious, I think, because of the atmosphere that I guess his personality sort of permeates, that we didn't want to kind of step over the line and piss him off or get kicked out, and so on. So I think we really dialed it in. Not that we're particularly loud and obnoxious when we do normally go, but I think there was very much like
speak for yourself.
A reverence that was sort of seemed to be required. Again, we may have been just projecting that because of his personality. I thought it was interesting when you just looking at the sign actually that beside one of the many owls outside advertising coffee and jazz as sort of background music, and I suppose that's a kind of a good way to sum up the place, wasn't it? It was very much like a cafe with jazz rather than maybe a jazz cafe, albeit he had the music and there is a lot of memorabilia and so on, but it was definitely a regular cafe, wasn't it?
I don't know. I had a better impression of him than that. I felt it was very, very jazzy. I thought that the problem was just because we couldn't really talk with him. And I definitely felt that sense of awkwardness as well. Like we didn't want to, we didn't want to push it with the photos and stuff. We didn't want to stay too long, even though there was nobody there at that time. But I mean, the fact that he's got the albums even outside on the stairwell.
Yeah.
Do you remember several episodes back we were talking about Guggen?
Yeah.
Where we have the records, he has them in the stairwell and anybody could come by and take them at any time because it's outside the shop, but nobody does. Well, he's got, we've got 5 of them there and there's a couple more a little bit down the steps, So I think he's definitely, he's definitely really into the music. I've read online on some of the jazz Twitter people that I follow, Japanese people, that it wasn't us. For a while I thought it might have been us. Maybe he was just uncomfortable. He didn't speak English, etc. There's, not a place many foreigners would probably go to, but apparently it's just his personality. By the way, we forgot to explain. You and I know why owl relates to Ikebukuro, but our listeners overseas, or I should say outside Japan, will not know that. The word for owl in Japanese is fukuro. So the town name Ikebukuro, B and F are sometimes substituted in the Japanese language. So that's the reason for the name. But it certainly applies to this guy who I could imagine sitting there. What's the place with the coffee? The guy that never talks and only tweets about coffee. We talked about it the other day. Kisa Sekatsu.
Yes.
So Kisa Seikatsu, the guy that tweets 50 times a day but follows no one and never speaks to anyone, just tweets about coffee and jazz. This guy is sort of his spiritual brother. He's just playing the records, he makes the drink, but he doesn't say anything. And that's cool. I mean, we can respect that and probably best not to push it too much. I think we did enough.
Yeah, I mean it was a nice place. I think again looking from the photos, I'm pretty sure it was all CD, wasn't it? But beautifully put together place, like as you can see just from the one shot of the counter. I mean, again, meticulously clean. Little shop cards, menus on stands, ashtrays, everything in little frames, and it was a beautiful place.
And you got quite a few of the owls, but I mean, there were more. There were a lot more owls. I think that counted at least 20, maybe not as many as there are cats in the Samurai, where there's like 1,000. But but he definitely had a lot of owls in there, and. I would say, like, if you are in Ikebukuro and you're doing some shopping or drinking, stop by there just to check it out before you go over to Paper Moon for nighttime drinks.
Oh yeah. So listen, let's get on to our last place. I've been looking forward to this one. I mean, I think from a photographic point of view, for me, one of my favorite photographs that I've taken in the entire project. Lucky, perhaps. timely, whatever you want to call it. But I'll never forget going into this place. So we're going to talk about Corner Pocket, which, I mean, even from the first photographs, if you're looking at the site, Corner Pocket, I mean, it looks just, to all intents and purposes, as a sort of an alley that you put bins in. And there's this beautiful sign and this kind of red vinyl chair. It's not for sitting on. It's just there. And I mean, it gets better as you go in. I mean, it really looks like somewhere that's been abandoned.
Let's set the scene. Let's set the scene. For people who don't know, Kagurazaka, in the central part of Tokyo, which is known by local Japanese as Little Kyoto, because it has side alleyways, sort of like stone, what do you call this? The stone pathways where, wandering down the alleyways with little eateries. There's even geisha. It's a kind of this strange traditional pocket in the middle of central Tokyo. But for reasons unknown, on one of these side alleyways that looks very, very run down, as you mentioned, is that beautiful sign, Jazz Spot Corner Pocket. So already you're it's an exception to what the surroundings are.
Yeah.
And then when we walked in, exactly, you captured it perfectly with the picture of the counter, which is, I mean, what has he got there? He's got half of the stock of the bar is just there on the counter.
Well, look, I mean, the shelves are not used for the bar anymore. I mean, when's the last time those glass doors were open to take a glass out? And you can see even from the bottle shelves up above, I mean, there's 4 or 5 bottles in there on the right hand side, and like you say, even it's a heavy reliance on the bourbon on the counter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much bourbon. Do you want bourbon?
Well, there's so much going on. Needless to say, this was not a place where I used the glass that he offered. I just drank from the bottle of beer that he brought. But there's so much going on in this picture you have of the counter, because did you see on the right side that there's a sign in Spanish?
Yeah.
Well, what's really curious is why Spanish. It makes no sense, because the other thing about the Kagurazaka neighborhood is this is where many of the French expats in Tokyo work, because the French Institute is located in this neighborhood. So there's a lot of French bistros and bakeries and boulangeries or whatnot in Kagurazaka. And a lot of his customers, obviously, jazz is huge in France as well, as we know. So many of his customers work at the French Institute and come by here. And he said that they, on a Friday night, you'll find that probably the majority of the customers will be these French workers at the Institute. So, he was telling me that story, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's cool. I'll have to come by one night to check that out. And then I noticed, well, why is the sign in Spanish? Like, did he make a mistake? Did he think that it was French and he wrote it for them? It's completely inexplicable. I mean, I almost feel like I want to call him up right now to ask him. And, he'd probably be happy, because he remembered me. It had been 2 or 3 years since I had gone there when you and I went, and he immediately remembered me and had a big smile on his face, which, well, you captured his smile in that photo you mentioned before. Tell me about why you love this picture so much.
Well, I just think it sums up him. I mean, first of all, he's just so happy. And again, in terms of setting the scene, I mean, we came in, obviously you knew him, so there was a little bit of, oh, hey, how's it going? And he was already sat in that chair, and he was watching he was watching VHS. It's so long since I've had to say that word. It doesn't come out anymore. He was watching I literally can't say it. VHS videos. I mean, you're the one on the beer, not me.
Is that what they're called? VHS videos?
VHS videos on that TV and video player in front of him. And it was on one of those kind of metal contraptions that I remember from school when, at the end of term,
exactly.
a science teacher would wheel them in and we'd get to watch a video instead of doing any study. And, we must have sat in that corner. He's looking at us directly and talking to us about what's in the video. And we must have sat there for a good 20, 25 minutes. And I think eventually when either a song finished or that particular concert finished, he then said, so do you want a drink? And like,
But Philip, you don't remember. I'm sure I told you afterwards because you looked at me like, does this guy even like acknowledge that we're customers? Don't you remember that I told you the first time I went there was exactly the same experience because he basically just sits there watching videos. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I had gone there a couple years before that, I walked in and he was watching Weather Report live at Montreux. Okay, which was a video DVD that had come out several years back. So I walked in, I was alone, it was early, right when he opened, and he was watching that, and he just pointed to the chair, and he sit down, and he's like, look at this. He said it in English, too. He said, look at this. And I looked up, and I was like, oh, wow, that's Weather Report. And he was grooving to it, man. And then he just kept shouting out things like, Jacko, Joe Zawinul, Wayne, and he got so hyped. And exactly the same thing. It was about 15 minutes, and afterwards he just stood up and applauded, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Can I get you something to drink?"
Yeah, it was brilliant because I think it was the first time. It's the first time we sort of had that experience. I think certainly going in to photograph it. So it was really interesting for me. But I mean, it was probably one of those places that, I mean, I know he's got a Facebook page, although he just begun it at that point, which was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. But I think, it was just one of those places where absolutely no attention really was given to any of the normal kind of business or hospitality norms that you find in Japan. It was just all about the music. You were coming into his space and it was just a fantastic place to go. I mean, really, genuinely, like one of the best memories that I've had from the project. What about this meditation room? Do you want to explain what that is? You know better than me usually, so.
Well, yes, because I do take frequent visits to the meditation room on our jazz nights out. Yet again, reasons unknown. The bathroom is labeled the meditation room in English on a very big wooden door. And if I remember correctly, when you go in, you know how a lot of times, restaurants, bars, and they'll have like the scented incense or they'll be burning some oil or whatever. But he had a bunch of flowers in the bathroom, in the meditation room, which again completely goes against the grain of the rest of this dingy, dusty, completely uncleaned bar. But he had some fresh flowers in there, so obviously he took the facilities very seriously, and that just. Another reason that it just charmed me completely, because it was like, no, I'm not gonna stock a full bar. I'm just gonna, the glass is gonna be dirty, the counter is gonna be full. I might not even serve you for the first 20 minutes you're in, but I'm gonna smile, I'm gonna groove in the music with you, and I'm gonna give you a fantastic bathroom. And as our regular listeners must know by now, that's a very, very important part of the jazz bar experience for me after a couple beers. So Corner Pocket, absolutely near the top of my must-visit places to get a feeling that you really won't get anywhere else. I mean, I don't think I've ever been in you've gone to pubs or bars back in the States or whatever, where there might be rude service or it's a dingy place, but never with anyone so just full of joy about what they were doing. So it's just really, really special. And that photograph is certainly near the top of my favorites of ones that you've taken.
Now, James, I don't know if you want to talk about this, and of course, you don't have to if you don't want to. And I'm not sure if it was the same evening or not, but obviously, thinking about that Kagurazaka area in particular, and I remember one evening we were there. I'm fairly sure it was after, but we went to another fairly unique kind of bar, but not jazz related at all. And I think probably for me, it's one of my enduring memories of just being in Japan, and certainly the relationship that we developed over the course of the project. And that's the Vows bar, which if you don't, if you're listening and you're not familiar with it, is a bar that is run by a Buddhist monk, if you can imagine such a thing. Do you want to talk about that, just the evening we went there?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, that's wow. I haven't thought about that in a while. Vows is it is run by a proper Buddhist monk. There is a small temple right next to the bar. It's he basically runs it with a couple of the other sort of apprentices who are at the temple, who are jazz fans. Keep in mind that this is Japan, so this is not considered unusual by Japanese people at all. I think that when I first heard about it, I thought that, oh, come on, they're scamming. It's just one of these theme type bars.
Yeah.
But no, they are actually Buddhists. There's an altar in the bar, and I remember because we went there. It was right after my mother had passed away. Very, very close after she passed away when I'd come back from the States. And it was a very sort of strange experience because in the Vows Bar every day at 7:00, the priest from the temple comes in, and he does a sort of I guess he does a sermon, a small sermon. And he's led up the stairs because he's blind. I mean, visually, the whole atmosphere is extremely, extremely intense because you're in this cramped little space. They're playing the jazz, you're drinking, and all of a sudden this very serene-looking priest comes in who's blind, goes up to the altar, he does some prayers, and then he gives a little sermon. And that particular night, he was speaking about the meaning of death, or I guess how we interpret the meaning of death in our daily life. And the timing of that was extremely, obviously, very emotional for me. And Philip, I'm glad that you remember that, man. That was a really special evening for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, it's definitely one of the things. I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of time sitting, talking or not talking in different places all over the country throughout the course of the project. But I do remember just, again, it seems sort of like gimmicky, but really it's hard to explain. But, you're just sitting there in a fairly regular bar and people are chatting and drinking and talking like you would expect in any kind of place like that. And then suddenly, like you say, it goes silent and everyone stops, respectfully listens to the priest. And then he read this kind of sutra out. And as you said, he talked a lot about death. And I just thought for me, it was just one of those moments that, it's very hard to recreate, I suppose. I mean, it's just incredible that in the context of you having just lost your mother, that was the subject that he chose to talk about. And I remember us just sitting there, in silence next to each other, and obviously very moving for you, considering what had just happened. And I think for me, it's just one of those completely un-jazz related moments, but a very sort of poignant memory from my time in Japan and obviously from our time together in the project. So I'm glad you're happy to talk about it, and I thought it might be interesting just for listeners to get a feel for that place.
It was a really, really special experience, and definitely very deep and unexpected. I mean, that's why would you expect this to ever happen? Yeah. And we're going to get into that on some other shows. When we talk about some of our other adventures, traveling, whether it's up north or down south, where we've had some non-jazz moments that really stick into. I mean, I'm more than 20 years in Japan, but there's some key things in there involving volcanoes and old ladies, for example, which I'll keep as a teaser. But
that certainly sounds like a teaser. Volcanoes and old ladies. I wish you'd phrase that differently. If you're interested in finding out about the Vows Bar, there's a lot of stuff about it online. Anyone listening in the UK, you'd be familiar with ITN News. They did there's a video about it on YouTube. I found there from 2013.
I've got a profile of it on my site as well.
You? Okay, good.
If you look at Tokyo Jazz site, you'll see I've got a little profile on it. Not too much about it, but a little bit. Yeah.
More recently, there's an article on Vice as well about it online. If you're looking for more information about it, you can find it on there.
I don't know if there's, to be honest, I need to check that they're still open. I do recall seeing, one of the sort of travel people tweet about it about 2 years ago. So I think it is still there because, they do have their local regular Japanese customers, but once it's been profiled a bit, there's certainly been a lot of overseas tourists who are interested in seeing this experience. And I think, like I'd mentioned, some people might have been skeptical that it was, a gimmicky, kind of a robot bar type thing, that idiotic place in Shinjuku. But it's not like that at all. It's definitely authentic and well worth checking out. And that whole little neighborhood has got a lot of things to see. So, certainly would recommend walking around there.
Well, that's probably all we've got time for this week. That was Tokyo Deep Cuts Part 2. We hope that they were deep enough cuts for you. I apologize for my seeming inability of my mouth to work this week. I don't know if it's just because I'm tired. It's been a long week, but wow. Anyway, I'll do what I can to try and edit out the worst parts of it. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please go ahead there and give us a rating and a review. Obviously, the more ratings and reviews that we get, the more traction we can get in the charts and increase our listenership. Equally, if you like what you're hearing, please share it with people, post it on social media, and let's get the message out about this fantastic project. TokyoJazzJoints.com is the website, obviously, so go on there. You can find photographs from all the places we've discussed today, and indeed 130 other joints as well, if you're so inclined. James, in the meantime, I'll see you next week, same time, same place, hopefully.
You bet. See you next week. And a quick PSA for our listeners out there. Do protect your VHS video jazz cassettes, because you never know when they will be coming in handy.
Just don't try to pronounce it.
Take care, buddy.
Take it easy. See ya. Bye.